Hello and welcome to Season 4, Episode 23 of Unlimited Opinions. I'm Adam Bishop,
I'm Mark Bishop.
and we are, of course, reading Alan Ryan's On Politics, a book describing the history of political theory from Herodotus to the modern day. And this time we're moving fully into the last half of the second book. So I guess the second quarter of this whole work overall, in which we're kind of turning away from the more historical account. Each chapter is a different period or a different thinker, and more so just going into different modern themes throughout the 20th century and what little he has of the 21st century. I believe this book was published 2008, 2012, somewhere around there, around about 10 years ago or earlier than that. But an interesting chapter talking mostly about mass society today, which is an interesting concept.
I'm not so sure I like this change in how he's writing.
Mm.
I mean, I enjoy it, but we've gone so far through political thought for the Western world, and now he's completely changing in part two how he addresses these philosophers and the development over time. And now we're just talking about themes, and I enjoy it. He's a great writer, and but it's different. He's kind of summarizing a different type of theme, I guess, for each chapter now. So I'll just have to adjust on the fly. I don't know. What do you think? Do you appreciate?
I don't think you adjust well.
No, I didn't mean about me. I meant about the book.
I mean, I liked it. It was definitely different. It's less of like, I guess, a story of something, because I feel like it's easier in the last few chapters to pick out, okay, here's the story of this chapter, here's where the political thought progressed, or here's this person's life, here's how they ended up, here's how things changed. This is more of a snapshot of like how things are at the given moment. Like when he's talking about mass society, it's like, okay, here is this theory and here is this theory, not so much like how these theories developed over time. There is still some of that, of course, but less of, this is how, things evolved, and more so this is just a more factual account, I think, or more theoretical account, maybe.
Yes.
All right. Well, moving straight into the first section here, where he talks about moving on, like we were just talking about from the previous sections. Alan Ryan says that historical accounts of political thinking usually end at the end of the 19th century for the sake of allowing time to lend perspective. But he says here, I'm going to read a quote, "The next several chapters are written from a different perspective. Long-dead writers often speak to us with greater freshness and immediacy than our contemporaries. The argument between the friends of the tumultuous Athenian democracy and the admirers of Roman stability continues unabated. We, modern Western we, want, if possible, to split the difference. We want to give ordinary citizens as much say as possible in the political arrangements of their society and to enhance their control over those who govern them. We share the fears of the observers of Athenian factionalism, the Reformation, the French Revolution, and the disasters of the 20th century about what ordinary citizens can do when inflamed by ideological or religious passion, bamboozled by demagogues, or beset by historical fears." He says, "We share the ancient and the medieval world's sense of the fragility of the political order. The 20th century, of course, had 2 world wars, innumerable regional conflicts, and overall just dysfunctional states start to pop up across the world. He says, we're unsure whether we care for politics at all. Since politicians are seen as widely corrupt, and many believe that we have almost exhausted the will of political ideas and nothing new can really happen.
Are we gonna have you read the entire chapter? Is that what we're doing this episode?
This is like 5 pages. I summarized it into a single paragraph. I'm just reading my notes here. Would you like to comment?
Are you quoting from him? It sounds like you're quoting from him, right?
I just quoted from him for like a few sentences. I'm not quoting from him anymore.
Okay, are you done?
Yes, I was done with the quote for some time. I was just summarizing.
Oh, I didn't know those were your thoughts.
Yes, this is my summary of the book. The way we've been doing the podcast for, I don't know, 22 weeks.
Yeah, but I thought you were quoted from him.
I did briefly, but then I moved on to my thoughts. You know how we usually do.
Yeah, but your tone this time was as if you were reading someone else's words. That you weren't speaking to us.
Okay, I'm sorry. I'll keep going.
So what is your no? Let's go back. Okay, so what was the quote that? No, don't re-record us.
Yes.
What was the quote that you quoted from him?
The quote that I quoted was about essentially how the ancient people still speak to current times. He lists these examples. That's what I was talking about. And I really like that sentiment, and I'm glad he has that sentiment in here as we're moving into these more modern things. It's not just this is the thoughts of the modern time and they have no precedence, because I feel like that's a lot of what we get into in the modern world. Is like, okay, this is the new stuff and it is good and we don't need the old stuff anymore.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
And then
So
I was
that's what,
further summarizing, later things, and then I was going to talk about this whole section as a whole.
okay, go ahead.
Okay, all right, thank you. He says, we are aware that neither
Well, wait a
progress.
second. Are you quoting from him? You're saying he says.
I'm saying he says as though this is the general gist of what he's talking about.
Okay.
I'm not quoting it, but
All right.
I had one quote about this whole section.
Okay.
Okay. It says we are aware that neither progress nor peace can be taken for granted, and so our distant predecessors are not very distant. And then, like I said earlier, the following chapters are thematic. This one focuses on mass society, the idea that politics consists of mobilization or tranquilization of the masses by the elite, and that's what we'll be talking about throughout. So, do you have anything that you would like to add on this first section here?
Yes, because he had a preface. I don't know if were you quoting from the preface or are you quoting from the first chapter or first chapter of the second part?
I was quoting from the first section of the chapter.
Because I thought his preface was good because, well, he also gives away some of his beliefs. He's been very good, I thought, throughout this book of not really giving his opinion, but he does say at one point, talking about the modern issues that it's mentions Stalinism and Nazism. And he says, or think as I do, that we have discovered that any form of socialism that requires command economy of the Stalinist kind is a dead end. Now, I completely agree with him 100%, but I don't know that everybody else does. I think there are, although, this was written a few years ago, and I think we've had some sort of revitalization of stupidity of the communist and Marxist variety. Then I don't know that it's unanimity. It's unanimous that the command economy of a Stalinist type nature is a dead end. I think anybody who pays attention and knows anything believes that. But when you look at American economic policy in COVID and post COVID, where it's not really command economy, but it's all this government intervention in the economy, and it's close to it. It's the next step. That they believe that they can control the economy through these expenditures and regulations and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But also, I thought he made a really good point with where it says, and I'm going to quote him. Quote. We hope that we know better or have more generous reactions, or at least more squeamish ones than our ancestors. And I think that's so true of modern people, and myself included. That it's like, oh, we think we are so much smarter and so much better. But in the last couple of years, I've really come to the realization that there were a lot of people in the ancient world that were a lot smarter than me. I mean, if you look at what they achieved with the tools that they had, it's so much more than we are. This last generation, of course, the dreaded baby boomer generation, basically, and then you look at like architecture, modern art. Tolkien was a great author. Who's a great author since Tolkien?
I mean, I'm prejudiced here because I like Tolkien so much. So
I'm not saying equal to Tolkien. I'm saying who's a great. I mean, Hemingway, was Hemingway after, or is he a contemporary?
I think
because he would have been post World War One. Because he served in World War One, so that would have been 1920s, 30s, I guess, when he was writing his great novels and stuff.
Yeah,
I've read some of his stuff the last couple of years, and he's pretty good. I kind of appreciate him.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are still great authors in the 20th century. I mean, I don't know. Are we limiting it to strictly like English language authors? Because I mean, there's a lot of like Russian work at the time that was like really, really revolutionary, really profound and stuff like that.
Yes,
like I have a copy of The First Circle sitting right next to me and stuff like that.
Right.
But as far as like English authors go, especially like after the 1950s.
Now, who wrote that one? Who wrote The First Circle?
First Circle, Alexander Solzhenitsyn. Solzhenitsyn, yeah.
They say Dostoevsky is really good, but I can't read him. I mean, it's not that I am unable to.
Well, you can't read Russian, so.
Well, I have an English translation, but I'm unwilling because I don't think it's very good. but I get
That was
I
the
just need
weirdest way to say that you don't like something. That was so bizarre.
I went through the back door. I just kind of went around back and snuck up on you.
I can't read them because I can't make myself do it because I don't think it's good. I think you could have just said I don't think it's good, and we
I
would have
don't.
gotten to the point.
I don't like it. Is what
Okay.
I prefer. I prefer not to read it. Well, yeah, that's true. But let's say, all right, let's limit it to my lifetime, 1970 to the present.
Well, you
Who's a
see,
great author? Huh?
I don't think I have like, the experience required to answer this question because so much of what I read is from like everything before that. I don't regularly read, a lot of modern books and stuff.
Do you know why?
Why?
Because they suck.
I mean, fair enough, but I can neither confirm nor deny.
Yeah. Anyway, my point is, I agree with the author
Mm,
that that um, these dead people have a lot to we have a lot to learn from them and their political theories, and they still their thoughts and their concepts that they articulated should instruct us
mm, mhm,
sometimes how we should think about things or how we shouldn't think about some things. They're not all right, as we talked, or in our opinion,
mhm.
talked about before, but I'm trying to get past the arrogance of my youth, to now being somber and depressed about my ineffective path presently.
That's that's really uplifting. That's fantastic. Um, Moving along in the book, we're going to be
Yes.
talking about theories of mass society, and I'm going to read another quote here, so don't freak out. But I mean, this is a thing that we do on this podcast. Now,
Now, before you do that, before you do that, I want to interrupt. So, do you think there's some claims in this chapter about that the mass movements or massive people or mass theory is different now than it was, obviously because it's a less populated time in maybe ancient Greece or Rome or in the Middle Ages or whatnot. Do you think that that is true, that we are now in a different era with different political theory because of population growth and that sort of thing?
I think the theory is the same. I think the way it plays out physically is different. Because like the theory is the same. He talks a lot about Tocqueville in here, and about how if you're not actively engaged, then you're going to become reclusive and really only care about yourself. And of course, Tocqueville was pre-internet, pre-TV, pre mobile phones. But I mean, I think that same exact theory applies to exactly what we see, maybe just on a bigger scale now. Is that as people become less engaged and they have all of these distractions of the internet and TV and podcasts about two people talking about political theory and stuff like that, they're going to become closed off from the outside world and stuff like that. It's easier maybe to fall victim to the theory, but I think the theory is still the same.
Okay. I just while I was kind of dozing off during your response,
Yes.
I
Okay.
remembered Ray Bradbury,
Mm,
excellent author of the
yes.
20. He was before 1970.
Yeah. Absolutely. I think.
Yes. Well, his good stuff. I don't know. I think he might have kept writing stuff later.
Yes. Well, what do you what do you think about the theories? Are they the same? Are they different now that we're in a different world?
I think we are the same, but I also I get freaked out with it's like when you see a video of like ants or insects swarming something.
Yeah.
Yeah, I saw a video just yesterday, and it was on Twitter's,
Hmm.
and it was a car that got struck by lightning, and the headline of the little tweet was, "Car struck by lightning, the whole village responds to help." And I found the whole thing frightening because this car gets struck by lightning, and it looked like the whole village came out and were rushing over to this car from all directions, and you're on like a security camera about, I don't know, 4 stories up, and just seeing them come from every direction to this incapacitated vehicle was frightening to me. So, oh my god, look at all the people look like insects swarming over this car. They're there. It's a good story, I guess, but I guess so. Like, if I guess the numbers and the mass communication, I guess.
Mhm.
I think we're the same people. I don't think, I'm a strong believer that human nature doesn't change over time, at least not over the relatively short period of time of 2,000 years or 3,000 years or whatever, metric you want to use. But I do think that mass communication and and um, the almost drugging of society, well, really literally drugging of society with pharmaceuticals and whatnot, and also leisure in social media and computers and video games, et cetera, et cetera. The screens,
Mhm.
I think the screens are, and of course we're talking to each other on a screen, but the
Yes.
screens are our enemy. Now our viewer may disagree because our viewer can see us, but
Our viewer can
but
hear us.
oh, that's right.
Yes.
That's
This is not being live broadcast
right.
right now.
But I've long held the belief, even when I was much younger, that a TV, of course, when I was younger, it was just TV over the air.
Hmm.
And, you had to get up and flip the dial literally to change channels. We didn't have remote controls, for crying out loud. But I think it is. I think it is destroying us
You think so?
um, in a very real way, um, overwhelming us with information,
Mm.
but but also lulling us into some sort of dreary dream state of life.
Hmm.
Like a Invasion of the Body Snake. You ever see that movie,
I've
Invasion of the
not.
Body Snake? You should see it. Donald, but don't see it right before you go to bed. You're gonna have nightmares.
All right. But I
Excellent movie.
guess I guess the question still is, do you think then that the theory is different, or is this just proving the theory?
I think it's just a matter of numbers.
Mm.
But I do think the screens are changing. I think the screens make our society different.
Yeah, I agree.
Because I think people and your favorite podcaster Joe Rogan
Hmm.
has mentioned this a number of times that humans have to communicate in person. And
Yeah.
and so like his theory on social media, even though he's on like this podcast, but his podcast is him in person talking across the table to somebody else in person for like 3 hours.
Hmm.
But he does go into social media every once in a while. But I believe him. He says his statement is he goes and he posts and he just gets out.
Yeah.
He doesn't stay on social media. He doesn't read his comments because he doesn't believe there's any validity to any of them,
Hmm.
whether they're positive or negative, because they're not communicated in person. And I think there's a lot of truth to that. This ability to communicate not in the written word, like by or something that you actually have to put on paper, like in olden days when you'd write a letter. I think
Yes.
this kind of instant ship posting is odd, and I think that has a bad effect on us, and I don't know that we know what that is yet.
Mm.
But other than that, I think like when it really comes down to political movements, I think people do still end up communicating in person with family members, friends, and politicians on a local level that is not any different. So the public policy, I think, is very much the same. But I do have concerns that maybe we are able to be manipulated in a way that we couldn't have been before in the mass media. What do you think?
I agree. I
It's a
agree.
long answer.
That was a very long answer. But I think we should. I do agree with your thoughts. Maybe we'll get back to them a little later, but we should make our way through the book a little bit. And I'm going to start with that quote on democracy that I was mentioning. He says, in the 20th century, democracy ceased to be a term with dubious political connotations, but as it became universally acceptable, it lost much of its content. By the time it had been qualified to embrace people's democracies, communist dictatorships, guided democracies, or military dictatorships, and Islamic democracy or theocratic dictatorships, there seemed to be almost no sort of regime that could not call itself as a democracy. As long as the ruling elite claimed to be endorsed by the bulk of the population and ruling in its interests, it could claim the title. Now, that's something we've talked about a lot on this podcast about how, people just kind of say, democracy is whatever is good, and then anything that is not democracy is bad, or anything that is bad is not democracy, essentially. So the overuse of the term democracy, I guess, is an important thing to keep in mind. But he does say that the idea, or one of the major concerns in the 20th century, was how liberal democracy, which is really a popular mixed republic, could be preserved. And then the hankerings after purer forms of democracy were likely to be self-destructive. So there is this idea of, pure democracy still isn't necessarily good. I don't know. What do you think about the democracy issue?
Well, I think a lot of people are just ignorant as to what it is.
Mm,
And a lot of and there's too many Americans that think that we should have a vote on everything.
yeah.
Well, the majority should do this. Majority says, and I see that in my professional life too, where people that should know better think that. Well, I think I might have mentioned this in previous episodes, where like a city council member will say, well, I don't know how we should vote on a particular issue. We should have a referendum and let the people vote on it. And thankfully, there's really no provision in Missouri law to have an advisory opinion by an election. And so I can
Couch.
couch my answers in that legal explanation, and then kind of subtly, not so subtly, say, you know, you ran for office to be a representative.
Hmm.
Perhaps you just do your job.
Yeah.
And so even elected officials who are representatives in a republic type situation don't fully appreciate that it is not a direct democracy, or they're looking for a way not to be responsible for themselves. And so that's a big issue, that people are not being taught that, evidently, either by their parents or by the schools, or certainly not the media. The media always talks about democracy and how the referendums are great, and they really aren't.
Yeah.
And they always say we have to expand the voting. More people have to vote, and of course, I think I am opposed to more people voting.
Yes, of course.
I want there to be one voter, me. That's it. I
Yes.
don't even want you to vote.
I was actually talking about this actually just this weekend on a political talk show. I'm a frequent guest, and I'm going to take over the show at some point soon. A political talk show on the student radio
Revolution.
station.
Is that
Well,
revolution?
I'm not forcibly taking it over. The reins are going to be handed over to me and a couple other people, I believe. Um, but we were talking about at what point do we just rely on the people or things like that. And essentially, the point that I said is Tocqueville's point that I think we talked about a couple chapters ago, is that the person that you vote for is not just your delegate. They're not just doing exactly what the people say. They're the representative, and they make decisions for them and things like that. And so, a person should not just be bound to the majority opinion of their voters necessarily, but if the majority opinion does line up with the actions, like if there is public support for the actions of the representative, then it is a good sign that they are actually representing their people. So it's not that he should base his decisions off of their support, but if they do support him, it is a good sign.
Well, there's a lot of support for the Nazis in Germany at the
That is
time, so I
that
think
is a
that
good
shows
counterpoint.
a good thing. It was a great thing that they're. No, I'm of course joking. I do agree to a point. And I'm only I'm half joking about less people voting. I'm not really joking. I don't really want I don't want everybody to vote, because most people don't really pay attention and they don't want to vote. I don't know. They're like, I don't know if I want to get up a little early and go there before work. I'd rather go to McDonald's after work than vote. By all means, go to McDonald's. The polls close at 7. Knock yourself out. Get a Whopper. No, that's a Burger
It's
King.
Burger King.
Anyway, well, that's how stupid they are.
I think that was you, actually.
Oh, that was me. But I will say this: I think they are representatives, and I have seen that they like the same city official that I'm kind of criticizing, although you'll never know who that person is. That same city official, when they had a contentious issue, they had a bunch of public comments, and the same city official listened to them and was convinced that the way this person was going to vote was wrong, and voted the opposite direction, not because of public pressure, but because of new information. And I find that so refreshing and inspiring. And that's when I become a disciple of Tocqueville, because
Mhm.
he believed that there was this kind of civic minded, um, independent nature of the American people,
Mhm.
that they would pay attention to the issues generally, and I know he recognized there's a danger of retreating into your own world and not being engaged civically, but I do get encouraged on a regular basis. The regular people when they get together and they can give public input, or there's so many volunteer boards in every community. I feel much better about society and about our future. And so when I say it's a republic and it's not a democracy, that there still has to be a way to get input to them, so that you can communicate with them that you think they're crazy or whatever, or do what they're doing. but yeah, I mean the idea that, and of course people don't understand that democracy is almost the worst form of government.
Yeah.
True democracy where everybody's voting on everything in an assembly. I mean, they tried that after the French Revolution with their People's Assembly, and then to encourage participation, they paid them
Yeah.
because it was a tough time, and so people were getting paid to go in there, and that's when you have that situation, and then you have no limitation on their power, and then you have no protections for individual liberty or individual rights, and you have the guillotine.
Mhm.
And
And that's kind of something that that's a similar sentiment that Alan Ryan expresses. He says, the fear that this pure democracy, if this would happen, this would be met with rallies where dictators whipped crowds into frenzies of hatreds. This idea of, if you do just have this mob of pure democracy, it's very easy to kind of whip them into a frenzy. And this is one of the fears of mass society. And the concept of mass society relies on the idea that the ordinary person becomes not an independent, self-motivated citizen, but an element in a bigger mass. And so mass society would be politically inert, but live contentedly while an elite manages their affairs. The masses might become prey to the wiles of demagogues and things like that. So it's just the idea that we are living contentedly. Technically, we are happy, but really no progress is being made, and people above us are just controlling everything. Is the core belief of a lot of these different interpretations of mass society.
of the fear of a mass society.
Yes, correct. Yes. He goes on to talk about how there are two common dichotomies, however, in this interpretation. The first is the mass versus the elite. He says the masses don't threaten the existence of elites as they are incapable of independent action and cannot act without leadership. However, the elite must be careful to not anger the mob. So, it's again this idea of, the larger group as opposed to an elite in power. They have the power, but they can be overthrown. There's this other idea, this other dichotomy of the mass versus the individual, in which the individual himself is just lost in the crowd and is powerless to affect a society's moral, cultural, or political attitudes and institutions. So two kind of different fears about the mass as a whole losing power, or about the individual himself losing power in such a society. And I think both are not good options, I suppose.
Correct. There's a danger of a society going in either direction at any time.
Yes.
If you have this public input and the more democratic, more participatory governance you have those risks of either happening.
Yes. He goes on to say that there are three main forms of anxiety about mass society, and these are the three big topics we'll be talking about the rest of the chapter. The first is that society is inimical to individuality, and this is Tocqueville's quiet despotism, in which individuals have turned inward, away from the public sphere, and leaving their affairs to be managed by an unanswerable government. All it requires is for citizens to sacrifice their independence for their desire for comfort and a quiet life. The second is the Marxist theory of mass society, which is the unhappiness of a lot of these Marxists in the early 20th century who saw that, socialism was not proceeding as planned. And they thought the industrial proletariat was the bearer of historical progress, but found that the average proletariat had no part to play in history, and that the common man's attachment to socialism is easily bought off by prosperity. So if you just keep them happy, then they won't revolt and bring about our holy socialism. And the third main form is that the cultural tone is set by an elite who act as though they stem from tradition, as well as the consensus that they know what excellence is, and that the non-elite defers to the elite's leadership and expect to be educated into its standards. So essentially like a giving up of the mass and just accepting that the elite know what's best in all sorts of spheres, the moral, the cultural, and the political. So those are the big three topics we'll be talking about in this episode.
Good summary.
Thank you. Moving straight along into Tocquevillian fears, the liberal anxiety. He says, I'm going to read another quote. American observers have been several minds about whether Tocqueville's fears have come true. On the face of it, they have not. There are few countries where people are quicker to express their own views or more convinced that the world should give them a hearing. The United States is a nation of loudmouths, not shrinking violets. And he goes on to talk about,
Agreed.
however, even though we do have all of those opinions, he says, it's very rare to find an individual who really thinks. The creature who expresses his or her opinions on the airwaves is not thinking, but parroting. Public opinion, to which politicians supposedly defer but spend their time manipulating, is a loud noise made by a flock of parrots, not the speech of citizens. So although we have a lot of opinions, are they good? Are they just someone else's opinions that we're just repeating that we've heard from someone else? Kind of existential crisis about this podcast as a whole, maybe. But that's the big sort of balance that we have to draw here. Is there's a lot of opinions, but are they worth anything?
Well, yeah, I mean, we're kind of talking into the wilderness or into the forest. Is anybody even listening to us? And it doesn't make any difference. But I think the support for the latter theory about people aren't really thinking for themselves. That you can say whatever you want, but if you're just being led around by consultants and politicians who are trying to manipulate you, then and you don't recognize that as a risk, a real possibility, you end up with the COVID tyranny, which I keep saying I don't want to talk about, but I talk about almost every episode, and the BLM riots, and defunding the police, and all these different theories that when you put them in practice, it's like, wait a second, what is your solution? And none of this makes sense, especially the COVID thing. That just the unanimity of stupidity.
That's a good book title right there.
Yeah. It was really surprising living through that and coming from a different generation, obviously, than you, because you are the generation after me, literally.
That's true.
So yeah, I think the author probably would have emphasized that more if this were written now, because boy, and we just don't have, we have very few true leaders.
Yeah.
In the federal level, I
Yeah.
mean, we're getting more. And the one thing that I find somewhat refreshing, the squad members to a point, the people they call the squad, the congresswoman, at least they have opinions, and they are somewhat politically incorrect. Granted, they're generally against Jews, I guess, a couple of them. So that's not good. But like AOC is kind of some sort of rich girl socialist.
Mm-hmm.
So at least she's saying stuff. Now, sometimes it's kind of, I don't know that she really thought it through, but then you see on the conservative side, you have some disparate opinions, and maybe we'll see some changes, but so much of, like the war in Ukraine, it's like you have almost everybody in Washington say, let's ship more weapons to them, and maybe that's a good idea, but perhaps we should declare war on somebody first.
Yeah.
If it's such a good idea, let's declare war on Russia. Fuck it. I mean, pardon my language, but I mean, we're sending billions and billions of dollars worth of arms to someone we don't have a treaty with.
Mm-hmm.
But everybody in Washington says this is a great idea. There's no downside.
Yeah.
And I think that goes back to this point is, if they're just kind of manipulating us into believing that that's the only proper option, and in this mass media and environment, then we're in trouble, and that criticism rings true.
Going back to the book, he kind of
that was about the book.
That was about the book, but going back to my summary of the book, I'm sorry, I have to be very, very hyper-specific.
I think you're implying that I am not being focused enough in this episode.
Well, we're like a half hour in, and we are only on like the third section of this chapter, so we're a little rambly. This is a strange episode. But he says, what matters is whether we exercise the tasks and the judgment of our own. This is what is missing.
Wasn't that what I just said? Isn't that what I just said?
Yes, I was going to connect it in. He says what is missing is the individual who has both a private and a public life, pursues his private concerns for good reasons without constant assistance, and cares about the welfare of the community and his nation, and knows how to act to promote it. And then, kind of to answer your question earlier about whether these theories are still relevant, Alan Ryan does, explicitly say, Tocqueville is still relevant because mass society is not founded upon industrialization and population density, but the unchallengeability of public opinion. However, we may not be as uniform as Tocqueville feared, but ignorance and incoherence of much public discourse is still an issue. So that idea, the theory is still there. The theory wasn't founded on industrialization or, all of these, technological advances. That the theory still holds true. But moving along, talking about this ideal American, this educated, both private and public life, he says it's very unlikely for this ideal American to actually exist. The ideal type American may have once even been just the inner directed, conscience-driven Puritan, and now has become the outside directed, the other directed conformist, the slave to public opinions. Did this perfect American, this ideal, balance ever really exist? So the fear persisted that the uniformity of working conditions, press, and public education would create the mass-produced man. This is often presented as a cultural disaster, more, sort of disappointing or depressing than really frightening, and would be good if everyone was deeply committed to sustaining well-organized, uncorrupt, and politically intelligent liberal democracy and be imbued with the necessary virtues, but this may be too idealistic. So kind of a very depressing note, as he says, we want all these things. It'd be so great if all these things were true, would help our culture, would help our society, but is it even possible? Was it ever even possible?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's an ideal,
Yeah.
and I think it's important to have an ideal. And I think it's not a utopian ideal.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like it can't happen. But I think it's, like if you're talking about, where he talks about economic self-reliance and cooperativeness and this participatory republic,
Yeah.
democratic republic. I think it's real.
Mm-hmm.
I think it really is real, and it's not perfect, and we all complain about the lack of good candidates and money in politics and all that kind of stuff, and that does pervert things, but it's still there somewhere.
Yeah.
And we just need to re-engage. I
Well,
think
because it's not like the philosopher kings of Plato, in which they always make the right decisions, not the magically good Marxist leaders. It's just a person who is educated, who thinks for himself and cares about other people. And that's essentially what it is, but it's kind of dumbed down from what he says. But just can we get back to that approach? Because I feel like a lot of people do not have all three of those qualities. They're, either not very, well educated, not well read, or don't really have their own opinions that they're really, espousing, and they don't really care about other people and things like that. So, it's, a question of how we get back to that, or if it ever existed at all.
Yeah, I think what we need is to come to the realization that all our leaders are going to be flawed.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what Trump showed was that if you're just true to yourself and you're consistent on some core policies and beliefs and loyal to your supporters, you can weather a lot of this. Well, I know, some of the things he said was awful, so I don't necessarily want to trivialize it, but I do, because just because he said a bunch of stuff on tape with, what was that guy's name, with it wasn't Entertainment Tonight, it was that other one. He was talking about the women grabbing by the whatever.
Yeah.
Billy, what was his name? Anyway,
Do not know.
And so somebody recorded it and then waited for 10 years and then broadcast it during the campaign, and it didn't really affect the campaign at all. I was shocked. He just said, I don't care. And then he brought the people that accused Bill Clinton as a rapist to the next debate, which was entertaining. But I think if we get enough people that are candidates that can weather those kind of storms, to just ignore it, for on either side of the aisle, like the Santos guy that's in the headlines now, is this Republican liar from New York, entertaining character. Turned out he was like a drag queen or something. I mean, this is a great story. I think everything he said in the campaign was a lie. And McCarthy, the Speaker of the House, it was like, well, that's between him and his voters. We're going to throw out every liar out of Congress. We won't have anybody up here. And I thought that was kind of funny. And I'm like, yeah, all right on, whatever. And I think we just need to focus on, okay, what are they doing for us? And I think once we get that, if we get past the more trivial, oh, he said this, he's a terrible person, or she said this, it's a terrible person, like, the AOC stuff. If she says something outrageous, okay, I think at some point we gotta not vote for somebody who's just a serial idiot. or serial liar. But
Well,
you know, if
it's
you're right on
hard to
the
do when all
policy,
of our candidates are serial idiots or serial
right,
liars.
right, that's one of my kind of my point is I think there's a potential there if we can get past that stuff and start talking about the issues that matter to the voters and to the public in a long term planning. If you have otherwise flawed people like Trump, but you know, but he didn't destroy the country. You know, there's oh he's going to create World War III. I mean, that's what they said, and he was the only president in my lifetime that didn't have a war.
Hmm.
Literally, every president had some sort of military invasion or war
Hmm.
during their presidency my entire lifetime,
If
except for
I don't know if I ever told you this story, but related to, the fears that, Trump is going to destroy the world and stuff like that. My grade school English teacher, I can't say for sure if this is 100% true because it's been like 6, 7 years, and this story has been like circulated among people for 7 years now. But she either alluded to or said something along the lines, because we were talking about the Holocaust in class, and this was 2016. Right as Trump was elected and everything, she actually took a day off of school after his election, and essentially what she said was that there was going to be a Holocaust of the Muslim people in America because Trump was elected. Now, I don't think she explicitly said that, but it was definitely the message that she was trying to convey.
which, of course, didn't happen, and also would be a little ironic. I don't know because so many Muslims want to have another Holocaust. you know,
Yikes!
well, I mean, there was just a murder of 7 Jews in Jerusalem yesterday, wasn't
Oh,
it? Yeah, it
really?
was over the weekend. Yeah, seven, or maybe it was Saturday because they were going to pray, and they got murdered.
Mm.
And there are Palestinians cheering in the streets. Ah, yay! Murdered 7 Jews in the synagogue. So yeah,
Yes.
I don't have a lot of sympathy for Islamists. Uh, that's
You
not
should.
most of them. That's not
Yes,
most of the
yes,
Muslims.
that is true. Good disclaimer to put out there. Moving on to Marxism in mass society, the depoliticized proletariat. Many Marxists have thought that mass society undermines the revolutionary potential of the masses. Marx did not think that the proletariat was wicked when it failed to live up to its potential. He sort of followed Hegel's anti-individualist theory of history. It says the task of the socialist intellectual is to reveal the historical process towards freedom to the working classes, to show them what they were and what they must do. So this idea that we need these highly educated socialists because everybody is so stupid that they don't really know who they are and they don't know what their mission is in life. To some extent, I do agree that a lot of people don't really have a mission in life and things like that. But this idea that we need this socialist leader to kind of cajole people into the right direction is a little iffy for me.
They were that reminds me of. I feel like every Marxist is is like leading the Festivus dinner, where he tells everybody how much they disappointed him in the last. You haven't been a revolutionary enough, and they're complaining. That the capitalists are paying off our people. They should be, and then their solution is always the beatings will continue until morale improves. That's what the Marxists do. It's oh my god, smile. Now you're not smiling. I'll beat him more. I'm smiling. I swear.
um,
Smile with no teeth.
he goes on to say that this revolution is inevitable, but only if the workers understand their own interests and pursue them with vigor. However, this socialist process can be disrupted, as seen in the U.S. And he goes on with this idea that the American worker was generally much better off than his European counterpart. Essentially, you have this immigrant society. They're coming from a background of relative poverty, and they come to the U.S. and it's such a land of opportunity that they just have no desire for any sort of socialist movement because they have everything they've wanted, or they have much better than they were in their previous situations. They know that change is possible and things like that.
I mean, Marxism is the political religion of the unhappy.
Mm.
I'm so unhappy. I want everybody else to be unhappy. We have to change the system. And when you have an effective capitalist system, everybody's getting better. Everybody's as far as economics are concerned, the economic life is getting better, and so they get more and more angry that Americans don't want a socialist state where we have to share everything with everybody else, and of course that theory doesn't work anyway. but yeah, it's kind of I found this part of the book entertaining because like they mentioned, for example, the author says, their beliefs, stupid conservatives. Well, he says stupid conservatives invite revolution, intelligent conservatives diffuse it. They're paying off people.
Mhm.
And I just saw a post from Josh Hawley, who's our senator from Missouri, who's supposed to be this right wing conservative, and he's introduced a bill to cap the prices on insulin to no more than $25 a month per person. I'm like, what? Why we? I mean, maybe that's a good idea. I haven't really looked into it, but I'm thinking that's price controls, and any conservative economist will say, wait a second, you do that, you're going to end up cutting your supply at some point, because if it's not cost effective, maybe that's a great price point, but why is a senator from Missouri setting the price point? But he's an example of a conservative trying to diffuse that revolutionary impulse to say we don't want socialized medicine. Well, okay, we'll just give it to you in dribs and drabs. Is his solution.
Well, I think that was a Trump policy. I think Trump originally wrote that as an executive order to lower the price of insulin, and I don't think it was really a price, controlling. Well, I guess it is technically price controlling, but it is. I think insulin has been so highly inflated, above their profit margins, I believe.
Really?
Yes,
You've seen their profit loss statements?
I have not myself. No, that is.
Insulin's been around for a long time. I was surprised that it would be so expensive, and you would think that it could be mass produced by another supplier to undercut their price. I'm not sure exactly what's the reason
Something.
for the price increase.
It was something about the only like a few companies like actually have the rights to use the patents for the medicine or something like that, something along those lines. And so I think it's
Insulin?
essentially what?
Really?
Yeah, insulin.
Well, it sounds like we need patent reform.
Maybe.
I mean, because we have like trademarks last way too long. We should have open use, like all these old Disney movies from the 1940s. It should be free reign right now. They should only be able to trademark their artistic stuff for so long, and then it's.
Yeah.
I mean, nobody's paying Beethoven, are they?
Not that. Well, he's dead.
Well, so Walt Disney's dead. All the
That is
people that
true.
created the Walt Disney movies in the 1940s are dead.
Yeah,
They're all dead. Why are we paying somebody for that?
that's a good question.
Why do the descendants get unlimited royalties from somebody that, especially when their heirs are not Disney's? I don't know who the Disney people are. I mean, it's a corporation now, but let's say that if the descendants are people that the artist would find abhorrent today. Their politics and everything are exactly opposite of every value they've had, and they're still getting rich off of their artistry and their work and their creativity 60 years after they died. What's the point of that?
That's fair.
Why isn't it public use? Why aren't why aren't these? I mean, I'm all for having patents on and giving a license to the companies that put the money in to develop something that, especially something that is such a lifesaver and improving the life quality for so many people in the healthcare field. I'm not against the pharmaceutical companies at all, and I think they should get a healthy profit because they do great work for the most part, or for a good part. And but at some point it has to end, and it goes on too long, and especially in the United States, it goes on longer here. That's why sometimes it's more expensive to get pharmaceutical drugs in the United States than it is in other countries, because the patents lapsed, say in Canada or in Europe or in Africa or something. And so they can get what's called generics, which means just a different manufacturers using that science to provide it to other people, but they can't sell it here because it's illegal here because you're violating a patent.
Interesting. I didn't know that.
So why don't we just open up, instead of trying to control the price at the back end or the front end? Why don't we go to the back end and say, you know what, you can still do this and you can charge $100, but you can't do it exclusively anymore.
That was a good rant. I was not expecting that rant today, but that was a good rant.
Ah, there you go.
Yes, thank you. He goes on to say, coming back to Marxism, he says, the issue of how the proletariat becomes a mass is explained in part by emigration from the personal rural communities into the impersonal urban mass, and you lose all of your familiar social supports. And it's also sort of explained away, explained because, the proletarian may become a mass when they are distracted and kept happy on a diet of trash. And he kind of points to the example of the drugs of Huxley's Brave New World, in which everybody's just in a constant state of euphoria because they can just have drugs pumped straight into them. Says if everyone is kept happy, they will not imagine change nor rebellion. He says, however, critics of this say that it is not, that this is not consciously engineered. It's very unlikely that their entertainment executives congratulating themselves on staving off revolution. This is much popular culture is instead subversive, just not how Marxist theorists wanted. The individuals have lost the power of action. They are collectively unable to act in a radical way. This passivity lies less in the culture and more in the routine of working that allows for no creative energy, imagination, or self-government. So that's the Marxist approach to mass theory, summarized very briefly there.
Yeah, that's just a theory of hatred of humans. They're so disappointed in the humans. They feel like they have to save them from their own happiness.
Mm.
It's like, oh, well, you are doing that, but I'm not sure why.
Well, they're convinced that it's some sort of
It's for your own good. It's for your own good.
We'll be happier once we kill a lot of people and install a magic communist government.
Well, they're very similar to Thanos.
Mm.
It's like snap your fingers, and if you eliminate half of the need, you then have you're doing that. You're basically doubling the supply of resources by eliminating half of the consumers of the resources.
Interesting.
And I think a Marxist would love it. Certainly would love the power.
Yeah, that
would use
true. Moving on to the revolt of the masses, there is an aristocratic critique of mass culture. So it's not just the mass people who hate mass culture, but he says mass politics is plebeian and crowd pleasing, and so mass values swamp the elite values. And this argument is set out in the Revolt of the Masses by Ortega y Gasset, a liberal intellectual leader of the Spanish Republic that was destroyed by the Falangist insurrection led by General Franco. He was a firm believer in the distinction between the mass and the elite, although he was a liberal. And he gave an account of the rise of the masses as a historical phenomenon. The cause is agglomeration. There are simply just too many people. He says there are too many people crowded too closely together, traveling too often in excessive numbers to too many places by forms of transportation that wrecked the places they had come from and those to which they went. That's sort of an aesthetic, criticism. He goes on to reference the polemic against a new railway line in the Peak District 70 years earlier. And now every fool in Buxton can be at Bakewell in half an hour, and every fool in Bakewell at Buxton, which you think a lucrative process of exchange. You fools everywhere. I thought you would appreciate that quote. You're laughing at yourself very, very much.
I love that sentiment. I don't agree with it, but I love the idea of this intellectual, being so angry that the fools from his town were being exchanged for the fools in the other town and vice versa. and then being stuck in a train with them and just looking around this crowd. I think I might have done that a couple of times. All these people,
all these fools everywhere.
All these fools.
Moving on, he says, the numbers and geographical proximity give the masses a weight in determining the public culture because there's so many of them, they're so close together, they can influence the culture. So Ortega adds that the masses want to remake society in their image. And so he creates this distinction between the natural leaders and the natural followers. He says there's so many natural followers and very few natural leaders. And so the masses are resentful of these natural leaders and they dislike excellence and try to ensure that it has no place in mass society. The masses have prospered because the economy is technically efficient and well managed, but this prosperity makes them want more prosperity and so will erupt into politics through violence. And this is, Ortega's idea of the masses. What do you think about this sort of theory here?
I think there's some truth to it. I also think there's a truth that we're resentful of leaders or effective leaders. Once people get to, it's like we always say. I think everybody says, when somebody gets to a certain level of prominence, you want to take them down a notch. And that's really a problem in American society because we all do it. Or if we have somebody that's really a groundbreaking leader, we tend to discard them, especially if they're somewhat disruptive.
Mm-hmm.
Because I don't want any more of that chaos. And that's why Trump has been cast aside to a certain degree by a lot of people because he's just so controversial. Why don't you get somebody that's less controversial? Well, you can't do what he was doing without igniting the controversy because he's not doing what everybody else was doing, like going to war with the world. He's like, no, maybe we should stop killing people in other countries. Oh, I never thought of that.
It's groundbreaking.
Get him, get him out of office. I think that's part of the reason why he's so popular
Think so?
among the white rural conservatives, because it's one thing to say that you're pro military, but if you're pro military and you just keep sending these guys over to get killed, and then you pull out and you haven't achieved anything,
Mhm.
it's just so depressing.
Wow.
So depressing for the people that are military families. Like, oh my God, why did I give 10 years of my life and my half of my leg for,
Mhm.
when you just retreated,
Yeah.
from everything that we did and all the money we spent. And I think that's why there's so many people that still support Trump from that cohort, because they realize that the other people don't really care about them.
Yeah.
The people that are talking about sending all this military aid into the Ukraine, they don't really care about Americans that may be sent to war.
Hmm.
They have no concern for that. It doesn't even enter into the equation. And I think Russia's like a really like kind of like a third world country, but they got a lot of people, and they're used to suffer. Their whole military history is filled with nothing but suffering and mass slaughter of their own soldiers. Like the war with Finland,
Mm.
they lost tens of thousands of soldiers in a stupid. And they had the Politburo, or was it Stalin at the time? I know it was a Politburo, ordered them not to never retreat,
Hmm.
and not even to do a strategic retreat. So if they got misplaced and got flanked, they were ordered not to retreat to fight off that flanking maneuver. They had to keep moving forward. And so then they just get cut up, and they would just get slaughtered by the
Yeah.
tens of thousands. Same thing happened with the Germans,
Hmm.
and the Germans came in there and slaughtered them, but there's so many of them, and they just kept coming, and their life expectancy is terrible. Their living conditions are terrible. It's not like somebody from the United States coming from our affluence going to war,
Hmm.
and that jarring adjustment that needs to be made. These people are like at war just with reality, man. I mean, it's a tough life, and I think that's part of the reason why Ukraine can fight them to a standstill, is because they live the same desperately poor life. I mean, Ukraine, I think, had the one of the lowest per capita GDP in Europe,
Hmm.
one of the lowest before the war. Anyway, but I
Yes.
digress.
Yes.
We're
That's a good.
talking about how we discard people that are disruptive leaders,
Hmm.
and how we resent people who are successful leaders. And there's a lot of truth to that.
Yes.
But
That
mostly, this is the Marxists are just jerks. They hate
is,
humans. They're
that
humans.
is fair.
They're humanists who don't like humans.
Hmm. That's, yeah, I can see that. But we move on to the ideas of Max Weber. He gave one of the most matter-of-fact opinions on whether politics is an affair of the masses and the elites. And his sort of idea was that the modern world is doomed to have its affairs managed by large impersonal bureaucracies whose political direction would fall to a small number of people with particular talent and taste for politics. Says the leaders at the top secured authority by possessing charisma. And what he defined charisma as is this authority bestowed by God, not very much the same as our idea of charisma. He says democracy is the only natural political form of the modern industrial society, but the only version that could succeed is the Führer democracy, or leadership democracy. With this, he says leaders are indispensable. They provide initiative, and we need institutions to make it more likely that good leaders will arise. So, very much placing emphasis on the role of the leader over the masses or over the common man, I suppose. What do you think about that general sentiment? Do we need these great leaders to really control things?
Well, he has kind of a theory of the elites, that
Mm-hmm.
there's a cohort of elites that have to be empowered in order to have effective leadership, and the democracy is a way to kind of cycle through them without a coup d'etats or insurrections or revolutions. But it seems, unless I'm misunderstanding or misremembering, I think he thought that there were certain population of elites that would be ruling us.
Mm-hmm.
And he also talks about, he makes a good point about the bureaucracies in modern society, which I think is underappreciated. Uh, the impersonal bureaucracies that rule over us, and the unaccountability of our federal government, which is a huge danger.
Mm-hmm.
And then when you talk about these international agreements, huge problems for individual freedom and for happiness and safety and everything. I mean, the less local control for any decision, the more dangerous it is. But he's right on about there's this professional bureaucracy
Yeah.
class and part of the government is usurping the authority of a democracy where you're getting to a point where you don't even have a republic anymore because the elected representatives aren't even passing laws.
Yeah. Now there are two critics, or two types of critics of Weber's ideas, and the first are those who really dislike the non-rationality of Weber's ultimate moral values. He says, questions of efficacy can be known, and that's kind of why we have all these bureaucracies. They can determine what's efficient, but there are really, questions of value that must simply be decided by leaders. You can't just, place a real value judgment on that. You need a leader to kind of lead the population in what is important in a country. He says, the other type of theorist who dislikes this are those who really value participation. And it's hard to tell whether, Weber really put much value in participation, as, the modern nation states, really demands centralized authority in his opinion. This idea of the leader doesn't really matter if we participate at all, so long as we have a good leader. And Weber kind of leaves that open. But he does kind of end with the sentiment that democracy is not impossible, so long as we have free speech, no restrictions on organization, universal suffrage, and elections whose results are respected. So as long as we have that, our voice is still heard, despite the fact that we rely on all of these leaders. But then I suppose, unless you have any further thoughts on that, move on to the iron law of oligarchy, the last section in this chapter. I guess you have no
Yes.
thoughts. All right.
No, because I thought we were moving way into that, and I
Yes.
was interested. I've never heard of this book, and I guess it shows my ignorance of the subject. By C. Wright Mills, Power Elite. I've never heard of that book
Yeah.
before.
We'll get into that in a little bit later. There's
part of this section.
Yes, but there's some discussion I think we need to have first about some the German Social Democratic Party. But first, Weber's leadership democracy was transformed by Joseph Schupter into what became the orthodoxy among political commentators until the present day. So this idea of the leadership democracy is still very prevalent and kind of served as the basis of the optimistic view that modern Western societies practice successful forms of democracy. But there's a less optimistic view provided by Robert Michels, a pupil of Weber and a member of the German Social Democrat Party and a supporter of Mussolini, so an all-around, really good guy. But he's best known for his book, Political Parties. And the main question that he was asking was, how had the German Social Democrats, or the SDP, become theoretically revolutionary? They were the progressive branch, but practically they were very reformist or very, conservative. And so to be a political party, he kind of answers this question. The SDP had to be an organization which is intrinsically oligarchical. The spontaneous and unorganized energy of the mass movement cannot be relied upon for a long period. So naturally, any sort of movement, once you form it into a political party, has to have some sort of conservative values. It can't just be constant progress, because that energy just simply runs out. What do you think of that theory?
Well, and he goes on to talk about how, whenever you have an organization has to have be held together by its leaders. I think that was one of his theories too. And that my question about wrote in the margins, well, how do you get to that Marxist utopia then? How do you get to that step where there are no leaders and everything's shared in his communism? When he makes the explicit argument that a group cannot hold together its values without leaders showing them how to do it, and that's why we never get to the communism part, because the leaders always have to tell us who gets what. But I don't know. I don't know if I have any other thoughts.
All right, moving on.
What are your thoughts? What are your thoughts?
I mean, I think it is, I think it's just true. I don't think there's any way of getting around that. Even if you do want to have this very progressive movement, in order for the movement to gain any traction, you have to have a leader of some sort. You have to have, some sort of direction that the group is going to go in. It can't just be all, the mass deciding in union, what they're going to do, because that's not going to happen. You're going to have you're going to split into different groups, and they're going to have their own leaders and stuff. We actually had this happen on campus with a political organization. I've talked about the Students for Communism before, but their predecessor organization. I just learned this, I believe, a few weeks ago. But their predecessor organization was the Progressive Students Alliance, and I talked about how the Students for Communism have a triumvirate of three co-leaders. Evidently, the Progressive Students Alliance had no formal leader.
Mm.
They tried to do everything completely laterally. There was no like hierarchical organization within the group. Of course, there's one person who had to put their name down as the president, in order for the club to actually exist on campus. So naturally, there was still one person kind of calling the shots, because that just happens naturally. But I mean, they were a completely kind of defunct organization that morphed into the Students for Communism anyway. So that goes to show just how successful they were. Yeah, I think it's impossible for something to really actually exist just completely laterally. You just have to develop structure. There's no other way around it.
I agree.
All right, moving on to C. Wright Mills in his book, The Power Elite, which made the claim that the elites rule in ways that are hardly visible as politics at all. Says all the important decisions are taken by small numbers of interconnected persons at the heads of both the political and non-political organizations. Says the elite alone had the power to make historic decisions. And of course, Mills was very appalled by the prospect that miscalculation by an unanswerable elite could end history in nuclear war. He was very worried, of course, living sort of in the, immediately after World War II into the 50s, about this prospect of imminent nuclear war. And he also expressed this widespread sense that mass society rests on a fraud that the welfare of the ordinary people matters to the elite, when in reality, this welfare does not matter to them at all. And this suggests,
Amen, brother. Amen.
I figured you'd agree with that. He suggested that the comfortable and prosperous mass, society was sleepwalking towards disaster. However, the power elite had actual little capacity for serious action outside of their own sphere. As far from concentrating power in the hands of an elite, the political system fragmented it so thoroughly that a president who could incinerate humanity could not establish national health care. The masses were powerless, but the elite had not acquired what the masses had lost. When political scientists in the early 1960s looked carefully for answers to the question, who's in charge around here, the answer was neither the non-existent insurgent masses nor the non-existent manipulating elite, but sometimes some folks, sometimes different folks, frequently nobody, and surprisingly often, depending on the issue, a person or group to whom the political system had assigned the task of making those decisions under those circumstances. And so it kind of ends this chapter with this idea that it's somewhat reassuring that there is no, pure Wizard of Oz, pulling the strings behind everything, but it's also, not reassuring at all to know that nobody is really in charge at any one moment. We can't really point to a single leader. You seem like you have something you want to say about that topic there.
I find that thought very reassuring. I
Mm,
don't want anybody in charge of this great nation.
mm,
The president is not in charge of this country. No one is in charge of me other than me.
mm-hmm,
And I think more people need to realize that. And he's talking about that. Well, the president can blow up the world, which is a problem.
mm-hmm.
In the era of nuclear war, and your generation doesn't even think about it, but ours did
Yeah.
in our youth. It was a big deal because the Soviet Union still existed
Mm-hmm.
up until 1989. So I'm 19 at that point. So it was a real deal when I was growing up because they had nukes pointed at us and all that kind of stuff. And so it was that was more of an immediate concern. I mean, the nukes are still pointed at us,
Yeah.
and now there's Chinese nukes or more of them, and we've got an imbecile in the White House. So with the keys to the car, but having said all that, he talks about, well, the president could blow up the world, but we can't have national health care. Well, maybe you should read the Constitution and see that there is no way to do national health care constitutionally. I mean, there really isn't. Health care is a state function, meaning one of the 50 states that make up the United States. And that's why we don't have a national health system, mostly. And if you look around at any one time, there isn't going to be any one person or small group of people that are supposed to be in control of this country.
Yeah.
Because we have it set up so we have 51 sovereigns, and people don't really have no idea that the state of Missouri is a separate sovereign,
Mm-hmm.
and every one of the 50 states is a separate sovereign, and that the federal government is then a separate sovereign. So you have 51 sovereigns controlling and making laws and having the certain delegated powers from the people. And so when he's talking about how terrible it is, nobody's in charge. Good. The less somebody's, the only time you want somebody in charge is when you're at war, because you have to have somebody make the ultimate calls on who's going to be the generals running the show and all that stuff. So absent a real immediate crisis like that, I don't know what he's complaining about. But having said that, I think he makes some good points about this elite,
Hmm.
uh, where they're not really a formal organization. They just have shared values, shared interest, and power and money. That they rule behind the backs of the masses. And I think there's a lot of truth to that, because if you look at the resumes and like the of all the people that we consider the powerful people in Washington, New York, and DC, and Hollywood, and all that, they're all interrelated. They're married. If you look at them, the big shot news people all have spouses that are somehow in the bureaucracy or somehow affiliated with, well, mainly the Democratic Party, but it's not exclusively.
Hmm.
Uh, and so I think there's a lot of truth to that. That there's this kind of oligarchy within our republic that can be just rooted out, but you just have to make the tough decision to do it. You need a populist movement that is long term and focused on the details.
Mm, very
And
true.
that would be eliminating the well, really, I mean, the fundamental thing is you have to limit the size and scope of the federal government, because if you do that, then there's no reason to have all these lobbyists and all that kind of stuff. You
Mhm.
get them out of the business of trying to manage everybody's daily lives, then there's not as much reason to be involved in it. Then it's just a hobby. It's kind of like the student. It would become more like the student senate at a college. Who really wants to even be on that darn thing? Don't do anything. We passed a resolution to do what? To say we're in favor of something. Okay. Uh, Congratulations. That's what we want our federal government to be more like on
Mhm.
most issues.
Yeah.
Well, let's pass a resolution to say we're in favor of good health care for everybody. Knock yourself out. If you're going to determine who my doctor is and how do I pay for it, I think maybe you're a little bit beyond your scope.
Yeah.
So how about that for another rant?
That was a good rant. I want to add on to that. There's a similar sentiment going back to the radio program that I was on this weekend. We were talking about, the nature of our elected officials and what, they should really be doing, along with, the election stuff we were talking about. Um, but kind of to the point that, I feel like our national officials, well, they're too well off. We were talking about, insider trading and stuff like that. How do you limit the money that is coming to all these people because, they have all the power and stuff. And so my suggestion at first was, well, they shouldn't meet in a big, white palace in DC. They shouldn't, have cozy offices. They should meet in a barn, in a muddy barn surrounded by cows and pigs.
In
And
Kansas City, Missouri, the
yes,
center part of the country. Absolutely. Yep.
but then I was met, of course, with the criticism of, well, wouldn't having nothing, make them more likely to take bribes from people because they meet in such awful conditions, wouldn't the good from this outweigh, the bad of meeting in this terrible spot? So then I suggested, well, then we just make, their actual duties so much worse that it outweighs any possible good that they could ever have. And so I suggested that instead of meeting in a muddy barn, they meet in a literal swamp. We turn DC back into a swamp and they stand knee deep in sludge and they pouring rain while people throw tomatoes at them. And that is where they make all the decisions.
I think you might have gone over the line on
You
that
think
last
so? You think
suggestion.
so? I
I
figured it'd be.
think you're onto something. Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. I think actually assaulting them with
Mm,
bad vegetables
mm.
is a step too
So
far,
just
even
just
for
the
me.
rain, just the rain and the sludge that they're standing in.
Well, I don't know that you can. I think maybe having it outdoors would be interesting.
Mhm.
Like the assembly in Greece. Certainly, I was opposed and aghast that they closed the Capitol building to visitors for 2 years because of COVID. You couldn't
Mhm.
even get in the building and watch what they're doing. Um, and I thought it was really interesting on C-SPAN during the speaker vote, because they didn't have a speaker, they didn't have anybody to tell them where to point the cameras. So you were able to see more what was going on
Mhm.
in the chamber, because C-SPAN was able to turn the camera to show you the people talking in the assembly, which I
Yeah.
thought it was just fascinating. Of course, then they did away with that.
Yes.
But I think pulling. I think you're absolutely right about moving the government from Washington D.C. I think it needs to be pulled out of there. I think all the federal bureaucracy, all those bureaucrats out of Washington.
Mhm.
I think there's plenty of office space in beautiful downtown St. Louis, and mostly on the north side. And I mean, like they should rent out all those abandoned houses.
Mm.
There's some warehouses up there. I don't think they should improve them other than maybe to bring them up to code so people don't fall through to their death while they're in there. But short of that, I think it should be the same conditions that the average people in an what do they call it, underserved community live. And I think they should live in those houses in those underserved communities instead of the palatial palaces that they have in Washington D.C. And you could limit their ability. You could just say you're not going to have any outside investments or income. You can't work another job. You can't be a consultant. Your kids can't be lobbyists. And you say, well, you can't do all that kind of stuff. Yeah, you can figure out a way. You can figure out a way. And really, I think what a lot would be solved by just prosecuting a few of them and throwing them in prison for the insider trading that we all know that they're doing. That would be a good first step to eliminate a lot of that corruption. But the revolving doors, but a lot of that is based upon their ability to get stuff for people. And if you limit the influence of the federal government, it's kind of like there's a supply and demand. If you cut out the demand for governmental action or its ability to deliver, then there's no reason to have thousands of lobbyists or have 100 people that were formerly military and CIA officials working for Google, which they have more than 100 of them work for Google now that have security clearances. Why does Google need all these people? They don't. Anywho,
yes,
you got me into a rant, but I think you're right with your sentiment.
Yes, it's an exaggeration, but I still think it would be fun to see all of these politicians meet in a swamp. Just once or twice.
It would not be hygienic. Maybe sackcloth. Old Testament type, uncomfortable clothing on purpose would be kind of nice. But then again, what if they started doing their job right? You'd have to have some sort of ability for them to not be uncomfortable all the time.
Well, my thinking is that the only people willing to go into those conditions anyway are, the more just ordinary, sensible people. Because a lot of people who go, you don't think so? You don't think so? You just shook your head at me.
I did, because the ordinary, sensible people are not in politics now, even though everybody knows if you get into politics and you're successful at it, you can be corrupt and become very wealthy.
Well, that's true, but I think so many people that are running for politics anyway already have some money, and I think a lot of them see it as a way to just increase their wealth. That's why we have a lot of these politicians here, is they spend their money to just get more money from all of these lobbyists. If you have, no possibility of getting money from these people, I think you would see, or just horrible working conditions that outweigh the money that you get. I think you would see more normal people, because there wouldn't be as many spots filled with all of these rich people just wanting to get richer.
That's a theory. I'll have to think on that.
That is my theory. That is what I think. I think I think unironically, unjokingly, they should meet outside in a swamp.
I'm a little concerned about the water and how it would affect managing the votes. I'm not arguing with the life is a form of punishment, and this job would be a form of punishment. I think that's interesting.
So maybe we'll just keep it in the muddy barn with the cows and the pigs and such.
I like a smelly barn.
Smelly barn.
I mean, farmers got to work in a barn.
That's what I'm saying. You get a lot more farmers running, as a percentage, because they'd become in conditions.
Because the farmer's going to say, I could do that at home.
That's true.
Smelly barn. Why the hell am I going to Washington, D.C. or go to Kansas City to go to a smelly barn? I already got that. I don't think that.
Well, then you only get the farmers who really care about their countries.
I don't know.
No. Think on it. Think on it. I think this is one of the one times I've presented a theory to you that is ridiculous, and I'm giving it to you to mull over.
I don't appreciate that you think my theories are ridiculous.
I think a lot of them are somewhat ridiculous in some fashion.
Every one of my theories is brilliant.
Sure. I think it's about time. We've talked for a very long time. This has been a weird episode. But this has been season 4, episode 23 of Unlimited Opinions. You can, of course, follow us on Twitter to get updates on when new episodes are out, and maybe even updates on t-shirt competitions in the future. We have those semi-regularly. But I have been Adam Bishop.
How many chapters do we have left in this thing?
I think like 5 more. So we need to start thinking about books for next chapter or for next season. So tweet at us some suggestions. Anything you want us to read, and we'll consider it at the very least. But for the time being, send us some suggestions. I've been Adam Bishop.
I'm Mark Bishop. I'm still Mark Bishop.
You're still, you almost didn't do it. But this has been Unlimited Opinions. That was an interesting episode.
Yes. I don't think we'll have to discuss your theory about punishment of swamp thing. I don't know.